Hello, it's Willie from the Ozarks, and we're ready for our August 20th lesson in A Course in Miracles workbook for students. We're reading out of the original edition, lesson 232, Be in my mind, my Father, through the day. Very similar to yesterday's, Father, I will but to remember you. Today, though, now that we're remembering him, let's keep him in our mind. Be in my mind, my Father, through the day. We don't want to just think about him in the morning in our extended periods and then in the evening in our extended periods, which is very important that we do that. But we want to bring him to all the events of our day and let him help us make the right choice by following our peace, which is in harmony with all that is, with truth. Okay, be in my mind, my Father, through the day. In this prayer, he says, Be in my mind, my Father, when I wake, and shine on me throughout the day today. Let every minute be a time in which I dwell with you, and let me not forget my hourly thanksgiving, that you have remained with me and always will be there to hear my call to you and answer me. As the evening comes, let all my thoughts be still of you. And as evening comes, let all my thoughts be still of you and of your love. And let me sleep sure of your safety, certain of your care, and happily aware I am your son. This is as every day should be. Today practice the end of fear. Have faith in him who is your Father. Trust all things to him. Let him reveal all things to you. And be you undismayed, because you are his son. So he wants us to every day be having this hourly remembrance. So, in his prayer today, he says, let me not forget my hourly thanksgiving, that you have remained with me and always will be there to hear my call to you and answer me. So our hourly thanksgiving is what he's calling it. And at that hourly, if we're having a hard time giving thanks, well, then we call on him and he will answer. All right, we'll go read what is salvation in just a little bit. Let's turn back to our text reading, and we're ready for paragraph 30 in chapter 4, which is under the section called The Ego and False Autonomy. And of course, chapter 4 is the root of all evil. So, paragraph 30. We probably should back up to 29. So while you're turning there, let me show you. I'm sitting in front of a, I didn't even look to see what kind of tree that was. That is a hackberry. But I wasn't showing what the tree. I wanted to show you the this growing up. That's English ivy. English ivy, and right beside it is some poison ivy. See the leaves of three? Now that's real obvious, so I won't touch it. But the English ivy is, here's a little piece I picked up off the ground. I'm going to take it home and get a start going. See how, isn't that beautiful? And it's a perennial. It stays green all winter long, which is really nice. It'll climb up about anything and turn it into just a green English ivy, whatever. It transplants real easy. I use pull. It goes right across the surface wherever it's touching the ground. It tends to re-root. See how all those roots come up? And these things have been used for a lot of different things. It's really good. You can use it for tying things. There's a lot of usefulness in just kind of camping skills. But another thing that I looked at some of its uses that it's been used for, and let's see, where did I put it at? Oh, here it is. I was pretty amazed all the different things. It says that it's been used for internally for a lot of different stuff. It says with small animals and or I guess even any kind. I guess it depends how much you're eating. It said children probably best not to, that they not have much of it. It's evidently can be somewhat detrimental. Uh, but but look all the things it's been used for. And of course, um, has been used as medicine for swelling and blockages of airways and bronchitis. Expels mucus from the lungs. Used for liver function uh, and to help in gout, gallbladder disorders, joint pain, inflammation. Anyway, there was quite a long list of all the things that it was used for. Uh, Hedera nelix is the uh, scientific Latin name. So, English ivy. Okay, let's see, let's look in paragraph 20. You are not prepared, and in this sense you are babies. You have no sense of real self-preservation, are very likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you most. Whether you know it now or not, however, you have willed to cooperate in a concerted and very commendable effort to become both harmless and helpful. Two attributes which must go together. Your attitudes even towards this are necessarily conflicted, because all attitudes are ego-based. This will not last. Be patient a while and remember that the outcome is as certain as God. 30. Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is quite obvious when you consider the concepts involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, then you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better so that you can do without the thing you give. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos, and is therefore continually preoccupied with the scarcity principle, which gave rise to it. This is the meaning of Freud's reality principle, since Freud thought of the ego as very weak and deprived, capable of functioning only as a thing in need. 31. The reality principle of the ego is not real at all. The ego is forced to perceive the reality of others because it cannot establish the reality of itself. In fact, its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. In fact, its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Self-esteem in ego terms means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself in accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which actually refers to a condition in which the delusion of the ego really is threatened. This produces either ego deflation or ego inflation, resulting in either withdrawal or attack. 32. The ego literally lives by comparisons. This means that equality is beyond its grasp and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. So the ego was made as a substitute for the knowledge that there's an abundance and that we don't have to try to save that little that we have, that because there's plenty for everybody. There always is. The ego literally lives by comparisons. This means that equality is beyond its grasp and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. All appetites are getting mechanisms representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of bodily appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. Bodily appetites are not physical in origin. The ego regards the body as its home and does try to satisfy itself through the body, but the idea that this is possible is a decision of the ego, which is completely confused about what is really possible. This accounts for its erratic nature. 33. The ego believes it is completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it originated. This is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification, or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. It is not free, however, to consider the validity of the premise itself, because this premise is its foundation. The ego is the belief of the mind that it is completely on its own. Its ceaseless attempts to gain the soul's acknowledgement and thus to establish its own existence are utterly useless. Let's read that again. Catch this. It says, the ego is the belief of the mind that it is completely on its own. Its ceaseless attempts to gain the soul's acknowledgement and thus to establish its own existence are utterly useless. Because the soul doesn't know the ego. And of course the ego can't know the soul. And why? Because the soul's in the world of perception, and the ego's in the world of perception, and the soul's in the realm of knowledge, which is always, even now. The soul, 34, the soul in its knowledge is unaware of the ego. And that's just what I was saying. It does not attack it, it merely cannot conceive of it at all. While the ego is equally unaware of the soul, it does perceive itself as rejected by something which is greater than itself. This is why self-esteem in ego terms must be a delusion. The creations of God do not create myths, although the creative efforts of man can turn to mythology. The creations of God do not create myths, although the creative efforts of man can turn to mythology. It can do so, however, only under one condition. What man then makes is no longer creative. Myths are entirely perceptions, and are so ambiguous in form and so characteristically good and evil in nature that the most benevolent of them is not without fearful components, if only by innuendo. 35. Myths and magic are closely associated in that myths are usually related to the ego origins, and magic to the powers of the ego, which the ego ascribes to itself. Myths and magic are closely associated in that myths are usually related to the ego origins, and magic to the powers which the ego ascribes to itself. Every mythological system includes some account of the creation and associates this with its particular perception of magic. The battle for survival is nothing more than the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. This beginning is always associated with physical birth, because no one maintains that the ego existed before that point in time. The religiously ego-oriented believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist afterwards, after a temporary lapse in ego life. Some actually believe that the soul will be punished for this lapse, even though in reality it could not possibly know anything about it. The term salvation does not apply to the soul, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged. Salvation is nothing more than the right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the soul. but which must be accomplished before one-mindedness can be restored. Let's read that again. Be sure to get this. The term salvation does not apply to the soul, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged. Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the soul, but which must be accomplished before one-mindedness can be restored. Right-mindedness dictates the next step automatically, because right perception is uniformly without attack, so that wrong-mindedness is obliterated. The ego cannot survive without judgment, and is laid aside accordingly. The mind, then, has only one direction in which it can move. The direction which the mind will take is always automatic, because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which the mind adheres. And we better stop there for today. And we're going to probably read that last paragraph again tomorrow, but it'd be nice to read it a little bit more and let it come into clarity for you. All right. Remember, miracle-mindedness is in the realm of, basically in the ego realm, in the world of perception. Okay, so now we're back to lesson 232, Be in my mind, my Father, through the day. And before we read it our last time, what is salvation? Salvation is a promise made by God that you would find your way to Him at last. Isn't that nice to know? It cannot but be kept. It guarantees that time will have an end, and all the thoughts that have been born in time will end as well. God's word is given every mind which thinks that it has separate thoughts, and will replace these thoughts of conflict with the thought of peace. The thought of peace was given to God's Son the instant that his mind had thought of war. There was no need for such a thought before, for peace was given without opposite and merely was. But when the mind is split, there is a need of healing. So the thought which has the power to heal the split became a part of every fragment of the mind that still was one, but failed to recognize its oneness. Now it did not know itself and thought its own identity was lost. Salvation is undoing in the sense that it does nothing, failing to support the world of dreams and malice. Thus it lets illusions go. By not supporting them, it merely lets them quietly go down to dust. And what they hid is now revealed, an altar to the holy name of God, whereon His word is written, with the gifts of your forgiveness laid before it, and the memory of God not far behind. Let us come daily to this holy place and spend a while together. Here we share our final dream. It is a dream in which there is no sorrow, for it holds a hint of all the glory given us by God. The grass is pushing through the soil. The trees are budding now, and birds have come to live within their branches. Earth is being born again in new perception. Night has gone, and we have come together in the light. From here we give salvation to the world, for it is here salvation was received. The song of our rejoicing is the call to all the world that freedom is returned, that time is almost over, and God's Son has but an instant more to wait until His Father is remembered, dreams are done, eternity has shined away the world, and only heaven now exists at all. Lesson 232, Be in my mind, my Father, through the day. Be in my mind, my Father, when I wake, and shine on me throughout the day today. Let every minute be a time in which I dwell with you. And let me not forget my hourly thanksgiving that you have remained with me, and always will be there to hear my call to you, and answer me. As evening comes, let all my thoughts be still of you and of your love, and let me sleep sure of your safety, and let me sleep sure of my safety, certain of your care, and happily aware I am your son. As evening comes, let all my thoughts be still of you and of your love. And let me sleep, sure of my safety, certain of your care, happily aware I am your son. This is as every day should be. Today practice the end of fear. Have faith in him who is your Father. Trust all things to him. Let him reveal all things to you. And be you undismayed, because you are his son. So be you undismayed, because you are his son. Let this be the end of fear, as every day should be. Be in my mind, my Father, through the day. Be in my mind, my Father, through the day.